And I remember reading about the pulp and paper industry, and it's really fascinating. How did it kept you engaged for so many years? What was it about that exact industry that was appealing?
Yeah, I initially became interested in,
How do you think your leadership philosophy, I guess, has evolved over the years? From consultation all the way down to P&L ownership, and eventually, obviously, into the C-suite with Georgia Pacific. How did that all? How did your leadership also evolve during that time?
that's a really good question, and I think the word evolve.
I read a lot about, technology and obviously ERP systems. We have had conversations of that as well. But what role, did technology, all of this ERP that's in play right now in reshaping operation has played for you? Like what lessons did you learn, especially leading such large scale, implementations on your end? We would love to hear some tips and tricks from your end.
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit more with the lessons side of it.
When we're talking about processes, obviously, in supply chain resilience, if you're looking at it, there's obviously balancing the short term operational performances versus the long term, strategic investments. So, obviously, all of this cannot be done in one fell sweep, right? So, how do you navigate, okay, now we're doing the short term operational performances, this is how we'll navigate it, and this is how the long term strategic operations will look like? Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really important is to have a vision about where you're trying to go. I don't think supply chain even existed. It certainly didn't exist as a curriculum.
Welcome, everyone, to the Vserve e-business solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the industry's great experts to share their experiences and gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, your host, and today we have a true champion of supply chain industry with us. Throughout his career, he's been the helm of massive transformation, from leading large-scale ERP implementations and navigating complex acquisitions to steering his teams through the challenges of the pandemic as well. Now he's sharing his decades of experience through advisory services to help companies maximize their value, and it's an honor to hear him today. Welcome, David. It's great to have you here today. I'm so excited to talk to you. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Cynthia. Thanks. I'm pretty humbled by that, so I hope I can meet the expectations.
I'm sure you will. From everything I've read about you and heard about you from our connections, it's been great. And I mean, your journey has been such a testament of, leadership and strategic vision from what I've read. And my first question always to, people like you is why supply chain? Why operations? How did you land up here? Because it's not usually the career path that people take in the beginning. So I would love to hear, how did you end up here?
Yeah, I ended up in supply chain probably a little bit by accident. Probably, in fact, I guess I've been around long enough. My career's old enough now that when I started my career, I don't think supply chain even existed. It certainly didn't exist as a curriculum.
Yeah.
Strange in that I got a degree in pulp and paper science, and I've spent my whole career in the pulp and paper industry. But early part of my career, I spent a lot of time in operations, and then I got an MBA and moved into consulting, and then did some strategy and business development type work. And then I moved into a role that actually combined several different aspects, continued some of the business development and strategy work and benchmarking and some financial analysis, but also included supply chain for a business. And then pretty quickly I learned the supply chain was very similar to the operations background that I had, still leading people, trying to understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And there's certainly a lot of jargon that goes with the business and a lot of things you need to learn, but basic decision making and very similar to operations. It was pretty natural progression. I got over sort of the initial shock of being asked to lead a supply chain group.
Perfect. Well, that's amazing. And I remember reading about the pulp and paper industry, and it's really fascinating. How did it kept you engaged for so many years? What was it about that exact industry that was appealing?
Yeah, I initially became interested in the industry because I was very interested in chemistry and physics and math
Mm-hmm.
and, sciences in general. And
Yeah.
that's really how I started my career as process engineer and really understanding the process. And that was all very interesting. As I grew in my career, I became a lot more interested in the business side of things, and that prompted me to go back and get an MBA. As I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time in operations, and that was a lot of fun. I learned an awful lot in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But then I had an opportunity to go into the consulting side of the business, and that really increased the breadth of understanding of the industry. There's a lot of different grades of pulp and paper,
Mm-hmm.
obviously a lot of different companies, different approaches. Started really learning those, got to see new operations, older operations, and
Yeah.
began to do some operational improvement kind of work, drawing on some of my operations experience. And then got to work with some really interesting clients. And one of the most interesting ones was actually led to my what I think is my third phase of my career. Is I started
Mm-hmm.
working with Koch Industries, who had never operated, never engaged in the pulp and paper industry, and they made an acquisition, and I was helping them with
Mm-hmm.
that. When we started to work with them, they were asking pretty basic questions about pulp and paper, but very quickly started asking some really insightful questions that really made one think. And lo and behold, they went forward with the acquisition. And then it was originally an experiment. They acquired two pulp and paper mills for a little bit less than $1 billion experiment, if you may. But they went on, then they acquired the rest of Georgia Pacific. And then I had an opportunity to join them. And so then that's when I did. That was 18, 19 years ago. And so that I
Wow.
really had a chance to grow. Now I'm in more of a corporate type role.
Mm-hmm.
And again, working with some people that are asking really great questions and very thoughtful. It always felt high level engagement, satisfied my own curiosity to
Yeah.
continue to learn about the industry. And so it was a very fun career. I guess I wouldn't trade it for anything. But back to the question, working in pulp and paper gave me the opportunity to work in all aspects of the business, everything from the technology side, operations side, to more business development, commercial side.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I'm pretty sure there's been so many different, departments that you've worked in, different areas that you've worked in. How do you think your leadership philosophy, I guess, has evolved over the years, from like consultation all the way down to P&L ownership and eventually obviously into the C-suite with Georgia Pacific. How did that all, how did your leadership also evolve during that time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the word evolve is a good word or a good way to describe it. When you come out of school, and I think any young person, you're largely an individual contributor. You're more trying to prove your subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
You're trying to come up with ideas, but you're doing a lot of things on your own. Sometimes you're trying to influence other people, but a lot of it's your own hard work.
Yeah.
As you progress in your career, you know, most people or many people are given the opportunity to start supervising people. And I think in your early days of supervising people, you're still leaning a lot on your subject matter expertise, probably somewhat to a detriment of your career in a sense. You're relying too much on that and probably not enough on other people.
Hmm.
But I think as you evolve and grow, you start to rely on other people, and you start to realize, and this is the way we thought about it at Koch Industries, that your primary responsibility as a supervisor actually is to develop talent, both on a team basis, on an individual basis,
Hmm.
and so it becomes a lot less around your own subject matter expertise. It's more developing the subject matter expertise and the teamwork of your team. And so I think I think the first time you sort of hear that, it sounds a little counter. It's like your primary responsibility is to develop people. What about making all these decisions I have to make?
Um,
As you think about it more, and certainly as you progress higher in an organization, there's a lot of decisions getting made. So obviously it's probably best to push that decision making down. So you're really trying to equip your teams to make the best decisions and really push the decisions to those people that are best equipped to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And and so your role as a leader becomes a lot more just yeah, again, to set that culture, to set that environment, to help with decisions. More, it's obviously a lot more important to ask the right questions than to come up with the answers.
Yeah.
So that's I think that's a big evolution from when you get out of college, where you think you really have to prove yourself by coming up
Yeah.
with all the best answers.
Yeah, people person. That's what you have to be a leader. So that we talk a lot about that, right? Leader, the boss or the leader, the difference between that. So I think everybody has mentioned the importance of people and culture and development of those people as like the main aspect of leadership. So it's great to hear
Yeah,
that it's the same.
I think back on my career too, and I think of the best bosses. They were always the ones that asked the best questions.
Best
You
questions.
know, they
Yep.
just had a knack for asking a question in a way that really got you to think about it, and which would lead you to a good decision without them making the decision.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I read a lot about, technology and obviously ERP systems. We have had conversations of that as well. But what role, did technology, all of this ERP that's in play right now in reshaping operation has played for you? Like what lessons did you learn, especially leading such large scale, implementations on your end? We would love to hear some tips and tricks from your end.
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit more with the lessons side of it, and
Yeah.
I don't know, going into an ERP implementation, and I heard this over and over. You know, what you
Hmm.
heard, implementations are really hard, and
Yep.
and then you face it firsthand, and it's certainly true. Implementations are really hard.
Yeah.
The case chose a technology that was a bit immature for our industry,
Uh-huh.
and so it made it even harder. And then compounded that by not only putting ERP in place, but also we had, I don't know, I think it was 19 different applications associated with ERP. So things like
Yeah.
a CRM and a customer portal and yard management system and
Yep.
integrated business planning. And, you know, that's probably one of the lessons too, is probably had the scope probably bigger than maybe it should have been. So we
Hmm.
ended up with very long implementation. We're pushing 5 years. So it's really hard to keep a team together for 5 years. Probably turned the whole team over at least once, you know, not all people, but some
Hmm.
was turned over multiple times. That was challenging. So I think we definitely want to shorten that process. But again, we handicapped ourselves a little bit because we chose it for some different reasons that was less mature and we had to do a lot of modifications to it. And
Hmm.
that's, I think, another key lesson. And I think it's one of the most challenging things is you're trying to find that right balance, utilizing an out of the box solution versus making the modifications. I don't know exactly. I don't know how to guide anyone to say what the right balance is for themselves,
Hmm.
but I think that's really important. And then I think the other big learning and is processes are really important. So it's
Yeah.
not all about the technology. You really have to put good processes in place.
Yeah.
That said, I think that's one of the reasons to do an ERP system. I think it gives you an opportunity to revise your processes.
Yeah.
Um, and that was certainly one of the reasons for us. We wanted to automate more things. Um, we wanted to improve the customer experience. We wanted to have a foundation. We called it a digital core that would allow us to use newer technologies easier.
Hmm.
And I think we certainly found that to be the case.
Yeah.
But again, I think any of these technology projects, you cannot underestimate the importance of getting the processes right.
Yeah, exactly. When we're talking about processes, obviously, like, in supply chain resilience, if you're looking at it, there's obviously balancing the short term operational performances versus the long term, strategic investments. So, Obviously, like all of this cannot be done in like one fell sweep, right? So how do you navigate like, okay, now we're doing the short-term operational performances, this is how we'll navigate it, and this is how the long-term strategic operations will look like. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I think one thing it's really important is to have a vision about
Hmm.
where you're trying to go,
Yeah.
and then to make sure the organization is aligned to that vision.
Hmm.
So- And I think you can't underestimate that, and we spend a lot of time on that, creating not only a vision for a business, but also a vision for capability supporting that business.
Hmm.
And then I think understanding, have good knowledge process in place, understanding a little bit what is possible,
Yeah.
and then really trying to understand the value that would be associated with that.
Hmm.
One of the things I think is really important, and I guess I learned over my career, is it's really important to prioritize initiatives. It's
Hmm.
really, really easy to end up with a lot of initiatives,
Yeah.
and obviously you run a huge risk when you have a lot of initiatives of not completing them,
Yeah.
just having too many on your plate. And then with those initiatives, then I think it's very important to have clear ownership of those. Make sure you have owners in place and have clear decision rights.
Hmm.
One thing that I'm a believer in, it's part of everybody's job to both say do the day-to-day job as
Hmm.
well again envision what could be possible, continually improve and to envision transformation.
Yeah.
So I think I've seen cases where I had a group that work on transformation. That could be helpful, I think, but I think it's really got to be everybody's job. They really got to
Yeah.
think about both roles. And I think that helps with motivation and incentives with people
Yeah.
if they feel motivated to continually improve. And then that's obviously an organization then must recognize that or must have the means to recognize extraordinary performance. So,
Exactly. Transformation is, and we talk about like transformation through all kinds of leadership, not just like the mid-level managers, the workers, but also the C executives and those that's where the transformation comes from. So that's really, great to hear. And I feel like this is across all industries. It's not just like, one area. This applies to every single person out there who's in leadership role. So perfect. And you've led through, I mean, a lot of acquisitions and integrations, especially now exact with your consultation work as well. What makes difference between like a smooth transition and according to your disruptive one? And I would love to hear an example for a smooth transition versus a disruptive one.
yeah, I think one of the most important things is having cultural alignment. In the best case, during your due diligence or even before you begin even make your bid for an acquisition, you have an opportunity to get a good look at the culture.
Yeah.
I think definitely there's going to be cases where cultures just don't align, and it's probably going to be a fatal flaw.
Yeah.
But and then I mentioned vision earlier, so then I think once there's cultural alignment, then I think you just got to make sure that you have vision alignment.
Yeah.
Another aspect I talked a little bit about is knowledge, and I think it's very important during an acquisition or the post-acquisition implementation to have knowledge processes both ways. So hopefully, if you're
Hmm.
making an acquisition, synergies that actually would go both ways. You're acquiring knowledge as well as you're bringing knowledge to the business that you've acquired.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important to have that mindset. I think it can certainly go wrong if a company makes an acquisition. They think, oh, we know how to do everything best and come into the company that's been acquired, and
Yeah.
it's probably a reason you acquired, and probably one of those reasons, yeah, you think it's a good business.
Yeah.
So you certainly don't want to come in with that attitude. I think another thing that happens, or probably one of the areas that would be most careful about, and it certainly had some of this experience in my company, we'd have a lot of business capabilities, and particularly when you're acquiring some smaller businesses, they wouldn't necessarily have all the capabilities. I'm talking about, IT,
Yeah.
compliance, legal, environmental, supply chain, and all these capabilities immediately want to come into the business that's been acquired and help them, right?
Yeah.
But it's very easy to get in a situation where you could end up distracting them taking them away from their day jobs and giving them a lot of training or just taking away from what they should be doing. And
Exactly.
also not listening, like I mentioned earlier, not recognizing
Yeah.
they also have a lot of knowledge. So I think that would be the biggest area that I would say is a watch out is be very careful about
Hmm.
that. And I think we learned that with later acquisitions. Don't come in and just overwhelm the
Yeah.
team in place by trying to make too many changes too quickly.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm pretty sure you've worked with a lot of outsourced companies as well, offshore companies in your time. How does the cultural alignment come then? How do you work on the vision aspect of it when you're working with a completely overseas, team versus what you have in-house? How does that work?
I think it's the same thing. I think you touched on it. I think it is vision.
Yeah.
And then I think it's having a very clear scope as to what you expect from them. I think
Yeah.
it's around that knowledge side, again, very similar to an acquisition. I think it's a two-way street, right? You got to share knowledge about your business enough to enable them to do their role, but
Yeah.
you also need to recognize they have a lot of knowledge. They should be subject matter experts in the field that you've asked them to help in. So they should bring knowledge. They should have a lot of benchmarks. They should have experience working with other firms.
Yeah.
Understand practices and processes that could be employed at your firm, or at least try to help with the task at hand.
Exactly.
And then I think it's probably important to have a pretty regular schedule,
Hmm.
provide feedback, have feedback both ways.
Yeah.
Have some kind of check-in on progress and so on.
Yep. Scope and vision. I think that's what I hear all the time. So, I mean, with such, global experience that you've had in terms of pulp, packaging, there's chemicals. How do you shape your approach? I mean, to benchmarking, driving performance. What are like your top five metrics that you always look at when you're looking at these things?
That's an interesting question. I spent a lot of time in consulting, even in my middle days. So I think your top five benchmarks in a way probably very dependent on the role or capability that you're in at a given point in time. If you're running a
Mm-hmm.
pulp and paper mill, you look at uptime as being a really critical
Mm-hmm.
metric. But
Yeah.
then, in a way that's a bit of a lagging metric, then you got to think about all the leading metrics to that, which opens up a whole host of
Yeah.
things. But I think each role, if you're in more running a business, you're going to look more at return on, might look at EBITDA margin or return on equity or return on investment, those kind of things. But again,
Yeah.
those are more lagging indicators. So you try to work at some more the leading indicators. I think the one thing that I've really learned is early in my career, and particularly early part of my consulting career, you focus, say, more on those metrics in terms of benchmarking. But later, I started to become a lot more interested in the processes that would drive those
Mm-hmm.
metrics. So then start to try to benchmark processes, which in a way is a lot harder because you can't necessarily drive it down to a single number.
Yeah.
But so that's later in the consulting career, started focusing a lot more on trying to benchmark processes. And then it was very much the same when I got into supply chain. It was really tried to work with our organization to benchmark processes, and then
Mm-hmm.
external parties and some questionnaires I found very helpful to try to help you identify those processes. Then it some comes back to some of those initiatives I talked about earlier. We did some of these maturity type assessments,
Yep.
and you might end up a two or three on a scale 1 to 5 in terms of maturity in a particular area. And that
Yeah.
might be okay. That might not be an area of priority, but there might be other areas. You maybe you're a 3, but you really thought there was a lot of value that could be created by becoming a 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But I think that process side was really helpful as I learned more as I evolved in my career.
And that's a good point you make, and I think this is a new type of vision that I'm hearing for the first time. Don't focus on the metrics, focus on the process, and then think about the metrics that kind of fit in. So that's a very I guess the modern way of looking things, right? So, and I'm pretty sure like over the years you've built consulting teams from early on in your career even till now. You kind of answered the high performing team, and how do you foster that? I would say, what has been the challenges that you've seen today's leaders face when they are kind of, helping teams and, kind of building them? What is the biggest roadblock you've seen in today's leaders?
Yeah, just to make it a little bit clear is the first part of the question in a way. So I think it's very easy. Very easy to look at the talent side of people, but you
Yeah.
tend to forget the virtue side of people, the way we thought about it as a Koch industry. And
Yeah.
that's what I really learned to focus a lot more on the virtue side.
Hmm.
Talents can be talents can be taught. Virtue is a bit harder to teach. People tend to be and have a virtue ingrained. And I'm talking about things like humility and being good people and working well with other people, being team oriented, but also to have curiosity and have high sense of urgency. And so a number of characteristics like
Yeah.
that. Um, I think one of the challenges, I guess, you learned a little bit through the hard way in my career was sometimes you'd have some very talented people, but they
Hmm.
didn't necessarily have the best virtue fit. And
Yeah.
they'd end up being, you'd end up spending a lot of time either trying to rectify problems or issues that they caused or
Yeah.
trying to work with the people.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, the- most of the time it just didn't work out. So I think that's probably the one thing I learned. You can teach talent, you can
Yeah.
to a large extent, but you can spend way too much time and energy working on the virtue sides. And you end up spending, you know, say the 80-20 kind of approach in the wrong way, 80% of your time with your 20% of your poor performers instead of spending
Yeah.
80% of the time with your good performers. So
Yeah. Wow, that was very honest of you, and I do, I know what you're talking about, because what I've seen over my years as well, it's not the talented, but the people who are high on, these kind of grounded rules is the people who thrive in these kind of environments. So I completely agree with you on that. And how do you, well, now that we're there, how do you build that? How do you build that resilience into, leaders? Is that something that you can consult them on? Is there something that you can kind of show them that kind of builds these resilience into them? How does that work? Or are they like a gone case and we can't really help them?
no, I think it's important to sit with people, and that's part of what I was mentioning when I said the primary responsibility of a leader is to as a supervisor is to develop people. I think it's
Yeah.
sitting down with and develop performance plans, performance improvement plans, just understanding where they want to go with their career, try to help them get their career. Probably the way we did it, probably the way most companies do it. We have a lot of one-on-ones with people.
Yeah.
Again, just trying to understand not only the things that they're working on and try to help them, with the decisions or how to even approach problems and opportunities, but also really get to know them as a people, what they're good at, what they like. I'm a big
Hmm.
believer folks are going to do best in working on things that they like.
Yeah.
So to try to have them work on things they don't like is
Yeah.
probably not going to work out well. Again, really understanding where they'd like to go, what areas they think they could develop in. We also believe a lot in 360 feedback.
Yep.
Um, and so not only from the leaders but also their coworkers, their
Hmm.
employees, if they're supervising employees, from their customers. So I think it's very important to get that feedback, and then again that goes into part of that personal development plan.
Hmm.
And I think is critical. So you have to have honesty and integrity. Sometimes you have to share news that's makes you uncomfortable to share and may make
Yeah.
them uncomfortable, but you have to have that honesty. You
Yeah.
know, you're not doing the employee any favor to
Lie to them.
share feedback that's not
Yeah.
honest. To
Yeah.
not identify areas where there could be improvement.
Yep, exactly. And this has been such an amazing conversation. I'm just like looking at the timer. I don't want it to end. So I'll ask you, like, I guess one more final question. I think it kind of is what we're talking about now, but I'm pretty sure like there are a lot of personal leadership lessons that you've learned as well throughout your career, being a consultant, being an executive, being a leader. what is one of the hardest lessons you've learned the harder way early on in your career versus now that you would love to pass on to the next generation of, supply chain executives, leaders, or anybody who's looking to kind of start their own consultancy firm?
This is going to sound very redundant, but I think it's three things that I've already mentioned. So the one,
Yeah.
value virtue over talent and employees
Mm-hmm.
and selection process, development process.
Yep.
Two, I would value people and processes over technology. Don't just look at technology as the be
Yeah.
all, end all.
Yeah.
And third, again, I mentioned it several times, but I think it's really important. You have to have everybody aligned to a vision, and it's probably best to have your team really involved in developing that
Yeah.
vision, so there is the alignment. But and then don't just put it on a shelf. Use it all the time. Keep
Yeah.
referring to that vision.
Perfect, perfect. Well, Dave, this has been such a great lesson for us to hear from you and kind of learn a little bit of your tricks and, tricks of the trade from you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you had as good of a time as I did.
It was fun. I enjoyed talking about this, and again, it's just some of my ideas. I'm sure there's many more good ideas out there. So
Yep, yep.
love to continue to learn.
Definitely, definitely. It was great to have you here today, and thank you so much for your time today, David. You have a good day.
All right, thank you.